Good morning and welcome to today's debate. Today's debate is for Northern New Mexico's residents who have to make a choice in the next 20 to 25 days in the New Mexico Republican primary. Today's candidates are running for the open senatorial seat. The candidates participating today are Elisa Martinez and Gavin Clarkson. A few updates before we get underway. As a reminder, this hour is being recorded and will be sent out as a YouTube file to our FRW clubs, our GOP clubs, and posted on our Facebook and web pages. If either candidate is planning on releasing the debate for themselves, I would just ask that you wait until after the debate tomorrow, which is Friday from 3 to 4, because we're going to use many of the same questions. And third, we decided not to ask questions about the Second Amendment or views on pro-life because we believe that the candidates' response to those issues are self-evident. However, if the candidates would like to address these issues in their opening or closing remarks, you certainly can. Before I explain the question format and debate structure, I'd like to introduce myself and our questioner today. My name is Anita Statman, and I'm honored to be the host and moderator of today's event. My career of 30 years was in emergency management and homeland security, to include serving as Governor Martinez's Deputy Cabinet Secretary for Emergency Management and Homeland Security. Now retired, I currently serve as President of the Santa Fe Federated Republican Women, and I serve on the Executive Committee of the County GOP. I'm also the New Mexico FRW Region A Director that encompasses the 4 northern clubs in New Mexico, including Four Corners, Los Alamos, Taos, and Santa Fe. Region A, together with our county GOPs, are supporting today's debate. The questioner for today's debate will be Heather Curtis. Heather's president of the Four Corners Federated Republican Women, the largest club in the state. She's been active in the FRW for years in different roles. The general rules that we've agreed to are as follows. The question pool was derived by surveying FRW members and GOP members in northern New Mexico. The questions and the question order is preset on a script. No question was specifically tailored for a single candidate, and the question team categorized questions into 6 categories. Regarding timekeeping, we ask you, the candidates, to monitor your time. We will mute you when we will mute your microphones at the end of your allotted time for responses and when the other candidate is talking. The candidates have agreed that Elisa Martinez will go first with her opening statement, followed by Gavin Clarkson. The order will be reversed during closing statements. Regarding the process for questions and responses, I will introduce each topic to create a context for each set of questions. The first question will then be posed to Ms. Martinez, who will have 2 minutes to respond. Dr. Clarkson will then be allotted 1 minute for his response to the same question. If during a reply, a candidate evokes another candidate's name, the named candidate will receive 30 seconds to respond. The second question within the same topic will be posed to Dr. Clarkson first, who will be allotted 2 minutes. Then Ms. Martinez will be allowed 1 minute with her answer. That will conclude the process for a single topic. This process will be repeated 6 times for each topic. With that said, it's time to introduce the candidates. After my brief introductions, the candidates will give a 3-minute introduction of themselves and their platform. So first I'll introduce Elisa Martinez. Ms. Martinez grew up in Gallup, New Mexico. Her upbringing in the socialist-styled American reservation system had a profound impact on her view of government. She graduated from the Gallup public school system and earned an economic degree from the University of New Mexico. Ms. Martinez comes from a family with a family business, which instilled in her a sense of responsibility and resilience at a young age. She founded the pro-life group, New Mexico Alliance for Life Group, in 2015. As a candidate who fights for New Mexican values, Elisa has worked with the New Mexico legislature and serves on the White House Coalition for Hispanic Engagement. She supports a free market, the Second Amendment, secure borders, veterans' rights, and a reduced government role in education. And now, Mr. Clarkson. Dr. Clarkson. Dr. Clarkson holds both a BA and an MBA from Rice University. He's also a cum laude graduate of the Harvard Law School, where he was president of the Native American Law Students Association, a member of the Federalist Society, and the first tribal member to earn a doctorate from Harvard Business School. Dr. Clarkson is an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation. In his professional career, Dr. Clarkson has held various university positions at the University of Michigan, the University of Houston, the University of Montana, and most recently, New Mexico State University. Clarkson is pro-life, pro-legal immigration, and supports the Second Amendment. He's a member of the Federalist Society, the Southwest Coalition for Life, and the National Rifle Association. He has one son, is married to Marina Clarkson, and is a member of the First Baptist Church in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Now, let's hear from the candidates. As a reminder, we do not have props for timekeeping, so we're going to simply mute your microphone at the end of your time. Ms. Martinez, you can go first when you're ready.
Well, I just want to thank everyone and for the Santa Fe Federated Republican Women for hosting this event. My name is Elisa Martinez, candidate for United States Senate. I am the only native New Mexican in the U.S. Senate race, born and raised in Gallup, New Mexico, known as the heart of Indian country, where I witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of big government socialist style policies on the reservation. McKinley County is not only the poorest county in the state of New Mexico, but one of the poorest counties in the entire country. And I, again, experienced firsthand the devastating impact of socialism and how these policies have led to the highest unemployment and poverty rates for Native Americans across the country. And so I've always been a lifelong Republican for that reason. My great-grandfather owned one of the first trading posts in the Gallup area, and I come from a legacy of small business owners here in New Mexico. I also have my own small business, and I'm the founder of the New Mexico Alliance for Life, a statewide pro-life organization. And I'm the only candidate in this U.S. Senate race who has taken on the far left in New Mexico and have won by mobilizing over 30,000 New Mexicans across the state to defeat radical abortion up to birth legislation and infanticide legislation in the Santa Fe legislature. I've served as a policy analyst. I've drafted legislation. I've served as an expert witness. I've also worked with Congress in 2016 with the Congressional Panel on Select Infant Lives with then Congressman Marsha Blackburn and now Senator Blackburn. I've worked with every level of government. I've served on the governor's transition team with Governor Susana Martinez, and currently I work with the White House Coalition for Hispanic Engagement, and I look forward to serving New Mexico as the first woman to serve in the United States Senate, but most importantly, the most qualified in this race, who understands New Mexico's values and who will continue to advocate for the people of New Mexico. As I've said very early on in this campaign, we are last in everything good and first in everything bad. And I will pledge to work to put New Mexico at the top of every list that is good and the bad of every list that is bad. And we have a tremendous opportunity as Republicans to restore integrity and honesty back into government. And I have a solid record to stand upon that has been covered by the New York Times, the LA Times, MSNBC, Media Matters, Fox News, and other major media outlets. I am again interested in seeking this Senate seat to be a true champion for New Mexico and New Mexico's values.
Thank you. And now, Dr. Clarkson.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Federated Republican Women for putting this on, and I also want to notice that there's only two of us that have the courage to show up to the debate. And I want to say thanks to my opponent for showing up, but also, I think both of us are noticing that there's a person who's missing, and that's Mr. Mark Ronchetti. Apparently, he's been ducking every single debate we've had so far, although rumor has it he might show up tonight's debate, but it's unfortunate that he doesn't think that the Republican women are an important enough audience to attend to. But I think both Elisa and I would agree that this is a critical audience in the New Mexico Republican primary. I'm an endangered species. I'm a Christian, conservative, pro-life, pro-gun, pro-Israel Republican college professor. And the reason I'm running for the U.S. Senate is real simple. 95% of my students cannot get a job in New Mexico when they graduate. They all leave the state. They go to Texas, they go to Oklahoma, they go to Colorado, Arizona. They just don't stay here. And before the coronavirus, one of my big issues was communist China. I'm a second generation Navy veteran, but I learned a long time ago, you can't trust the communists. I actually caught a Soviet submarine right before the Berlin Wall fell. I was part of the ship that caught the submarine, but we weren't trading with Soviet Russia back then, and we shouldn't be trading with communist China now. So a core element of my policy is what I refer to as track China, and hopefully we'll talk more about China later. But it's a very critical element, and a lot of the focus is not only making communist China pay for their gross negligence around the world, but also repatriating our manufacturing base, our strategic supply lines. And I was President Trump's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Economic Development. And I was on the team at the Department of Interior that developed the list of critical minerals that are vital to our national security and our economic well-being. Of the 35 minerals that are on that list, 30 of those minerals exist in the ground in New Mexico in harvestable quantities. But it is not true to say that there's only one candidate who's fought the radical left. I've been fighting the radical left my entire life. I fought Lois Lerner at the IRS. I fought Maggie Oliver here in New Mexico when she tried to rig the election with straight party voting in 2018. So I think I have a very strong track record, and importantly, I am the only candidate who could say I was hired by President Trump and then fired by radical socialists at New Mexico State. Jobs in the economy and coronavirus recovery are things I have expertise and background in. But we also need to focus on education, because far too much of our tax dollars are funding useless degrees at universities instead of focusing on a skilled trade, because every economy needs people who can build and fix and make and raise and grow things. And I know there's not going to be a lot of Second Amendment questions, but I am the only candidate that has been endorsed by Gun Owners of America, and I'm happy to stack up my Second Amendment record against anybody. I'm Gavin Clarkson, and I'm looking forward to today's debate.
Thank you, candidates. Now, let's get to some questions. The first topic is the COVID-19 response. The ramp up of the nation's diagnostic testing for the disease was not without its problems, as could be expected. However, the news media assumed that the federal government was not ready for a pandemic and has criticized its every step. I have to say, because I know a thing or two about federal, state, and local emergency response, that the response was uneven because the COVID-19 is a low probability, high consequence event of the 9/11 magnitude. To stock supplies for the nation for every low probability, high consequence event would be untenable and lead to unwanted costs. Alas, it seems the facts don't matter to the media and to the left. The partisan attacks continue to be made over implementation of the response as long as those criticized are Republicans. Heather, can I have question 1, please?
What are the most dangerous precedents you see being set as part of our federal response to the current coronavirus? How should mitigation of these types of events happen in the future?
Ms. Martinez, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think the most alarming consequence of the COVID crisis response has been the suspension of our constitutional rights. And in particular, some of the rights like our Second Amendment rights, the freedom of religion, our right to assemble. Many of those rights have been suspended in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic. I've been very outspoken from day one as far as the slippery slope. Even citizens on the left should be concerned about abdicating our rights, especially since the people that would be in control of our lives are the very politicians and bureaucrats in DC that we do not trust. And so it's very important that we uphold our constitutional rights so that is the utmost concern. Additionally, obviously, some of the spending packages that were instituted by the left, including the Green New Deal and other opportunities that they saw to exploit this crisis and pushing a radical agenda when, our churches are being closed, but abortion clinics are open, gun stores are closed, but big box corporate operations are allowed to flourish while our small businesses are closing at an epic proportion. Upwards of 40% may go out of business. I was the first U.S. Senate candidate to call for a safe reopening of New Mexico. Our small businesses are the backbone to this economy. They employ over 50% of the workforce. So these are dangerous precedents that we are seeing. And rather than a one-size-fits-all solution, there are many states, including South Dakota and Arkansas, that did not have a stay-at-home order, were able to contain the virus, which should have been the solution for New Mexico from day one. A one-size-fits-all solution we need to re-examine, and now that we know more about the virus and its implications on public health, we should start to safely reopen and look at a plan immediately for the people of New Mexico, because we're facing an equally disturbing and alarming economic pandemic. And once these businesses close for good, the revenue source for all sources of government is going to continue to dry up, and people will be without jobs indefinitely. So I think, thank you, and thank you for your thank you for that question.
Thank you. Dr. Clarkson, you have 1 minute to respond.
It's absolutely true that the constitutional, or the shredding of the Constitution is a very sincere and real danger. I'd like to quote the justice from the Wisconsin Supreme Court and paraphrase her. Where in the Constitution did the people of New Mexico confer authority on a single unelected cabinet secretary to compel more than 2 million people to stay at home and close their business and face imprisonment if they don't comply, and with no input from the legislature, without the consent of the people? Isn't that the very definition of tyranny, for one person to order people to be imprisoned for going to work, among other ordinary lawful activities? Where does the Constitution say that's permissible? But it is absolutely true. We cannot let Communist China off the hook for their negligence. And my Frat China policy, which I announced several weeks ago, absolutely will hold Communist China responsible. The first step is to go in and extract $1.1 trillion from Communist China's balance sheet and reimburse the American taxpayer. And I am the only one who knows how to do that.
Thank you. Heather, can we please have question 2?
As we move back into opening up our state, what is your recommendation to the governor to protect and support local businesses now and for future calamities?
Dr. Clarkson, you have 2 minutes.
Obviously, I actually opposed the draconian level of shutdown in the beginning, and because what this governor did, she shut down the gun stores, but she left the abortion clinics open. The pro-life movement is something I've been a part of my entire life. I actually ran a Christian crisis pregnancy center when I was in grad school, and but it's so obvious that this governor is politicizing the shutdown because she's running, or she's auditioning to be Joe Biden's vice president. But that we absolutely need to roll back the restrictions, get New Mexico open. But from the beginning, this shutdown has been unconstitutional in its implementation. And I am the only candidate who teaches constitutional law and is a credible constitutional scholar. So anytime you're going to have state action infringing on fundamental rights, whether it be the first, the second, the fourth, the fifth, the 14th, or the contrast clause of the Constitution, there's going to be a standard generally applied called strict scrutiny, which means there has to be a compelling state interest. There has to be it has to be done with the least restrictive means possible. And it's very clear, this governor has even if the governor would let's give her the benefit of the doubt in March that, the data showed bad things. And that was only because Communist China was lying to us and the models were so wrong because of faulty data coming from China. But she never looked at trying to do the least restrictive means. Why is it that Walmart was allowed to sell furniture, but mom and pop stores weren't allowed to sell furniture? Why could Walmart sell ammunition and gun stores had to be closed? We could have implemented alternative methods of social distancing, and we should do those immediately. But we also need to make sure that for our sheriffs who are right now standing up for our constitutional rights at the local level, and they are working to try and get those local businesses open, we need to make sure that we protect our sheriffs. So as far as I know, I'm the only candidate who's actually got legislation drafted and ready to introduce on my first day in office, and that is the Protect Our Sheriffs Act, which is protecting our sheriffs from spiteful enforcement. It'll protect them against red flag lawsuits, and it'll help them in their efforts to get our local economies open again.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, you have 1 minute to respond.
Excellent. Well, I think I fully support, President Trump's phase plan for the reopening of America. I was on a conservative leaders call with Vice President Pence to discuss the details of that plan, which are pretty simple. Here in New Mexico, we're largely a rural state and a rural community. We can enact the same safe social distancing protocols that are being instituted or not in some of these big box stores and grocery stores and hardware stores. Small businesses must be able to reopen immediately, and I support that plan to do so, especially in rural communities that can immediately be opened now for business that have zero COVID infection rate COVID infection cases in those counties. So again, a one-size-fit-all plan is not the way to go. I believe part of that three-phase plan involves reopening our churches. I just gave an interview yesterday to a 31,000 square foot church in Legacy Church in Albuquerque, where again, we can institute safe social distancing protocols immediately and get back to work, restore our constitutional rights to worship. Abortion clinics can also have been operating in the midst of a global pandemic. So we need to start opening business immediately.
Thank you. Okay, well, that concludes topic 1 on COVID-19. So now you see how it's going to flow. For each topic, you each get the question first and have 2 minutes, and then you each are the second responder also. So here we go. Topic 2 is education. Republicans generally agree that the states and local authorities have the primary responsibility for education. That being said, what can our federal representatives do to help improve New Mexico's dire educational system? As you know, New Mexico has a higher concentration of persons who do not finish high school than the nation as a whole, and it ranks almost last compared to other states. And our kids that do stay in school, they're not taught civics or history, and they are certainly not taught about the great American experiment, our Republican belief in exceptionalism based on states' rights and the rights of individuals. Heather, can I have question 1, please?
What role, if any, should the federal government play in state K through 12 education system?
Ms. Martinez, you're first with 2 minutes.
Well, I think it's important that we unburden the federal government's role in our education system. I'm a strong proponent of school choice across all educational spectrums, from K through 12. We need to look at, again, I don't support a one-size-fit-all package for public education. We need to look at localized and school choice options for parents to make the best choice for their children and encourage parental involvement in their child's educational outcomes. The United States of America ranks among the highest in spending on education, but we have some of the lowest rates in developing countries. So this is not a matter of spending more gets you a better outcome. It's looking at efficient and effective ways to implement higher educational outcomes. Here in New Mexico, we have the 49th lowest test scores in the country. And it's imperative that we understand that the very key to lifting individuals out of poverty is education. And we need to be able to compete with the education systems back east and other parts of the country where there is a primacy placed on education. And we need to take the funding out of the hands of the top-heavy administrative costs and put the costs back towards teachers and in the classrooms towards students. So I think another component that we need to re-examine at the national level is the influence that the teachers unions have on public education and the power that they will that they wield in influencing curriculums. I also would strongly recommend that we focus here in New Mexico on STEM-based education that will continue to allow our country and our state to remain competitive, and also again, greater outcomes in the future for the job opportunities. So again, New Mexico needs to make some drastic changes. From the federal perspective, that's what I would advocate for and be able to do, but many of those solutions can also be addressed at the state level. But I'm highly encourage and will fight for greater school choice and accountability at the local level.
Thank you. And Dr. Clarkson, you have 1 minute to respond to the same question.
Well, as the only U.S. Senate candidate who's actually been a school teacher since 1991, I've taught at 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, college, law school, MBA, and PhD levels. I like to think that I have a pretty good handle on what needs to happen in education. A lot of that is getting the federal government out of education. Now, we do have some funding models. And one of the things is we can, the role of the U.S. Senator is very specific. The U.S. Senator makes the law. They write the laws. And so we have to focus on what can we actually do. We all the candidates can talk platitudes about we need this, we need that. But the question is, what are you actually going to do? So let me give you a very specific proposal. Now, I too am a big proponent of homeschoolers, and I certainly took on my alma mater, Harvard Law School, when they were trying to make homeschooling illegal. The fancy elitists were trying to do that. But one of the things we absolutely must do is have the money follow the child. So if a parent wants to move to their child to a private school, to a religious school, or to a charter school, that money needs to be able to follow the child. And I know the legislation that will make that happen. And that's a specific proposal that I would put forward as a U.S. Senator.
Thank you. Heather, can we have question 2, please?
Part of the reason our country is in its current state of deterioration is because of the heavily left-leaning and progressive takeover of our nation's education system. Do you have a plan or strategy that would help usher in a revival of critical thinking, reading, writing, arithmetic, and civics?
Dr. Clarkson, this one's for you first with 2 minutes to respond.
Absolutely. I actually have a plan. My frack China policy focuses on China, but one of the things we have to do, if we're going to repatriate our manufacturing base and our critical supply chains and revitalize the mining and the timber and the oil and gas industries in New Mexico, we're going to need to have some trades, which means we need to emphasize those skills and that education that actually leads to economic prosperity, because every healthy economy needs people who can build and fix and make and raise and grow things. So step 4 of my frack China policy is referred to as the academic enema. And again, I'm a college professor. I was fired by the radical socialists at New Mexico State because of my support for the Trump administration. But we need to get rid of federal subsidies and state subsidies, if possible, of much of higher education, because that is the breeding ground for the indoctrination of our students. I would support and introduce legislation to end federal subsidies for any program at an institution of higher education whose students cannot go out and get jobs and be economically self-supporting on day one. So, I mean, as somebody who has changed the wax ring on a toilet, I can tell you there's a very good reason why we pay plumbers far more than we pay poets. And if you remember, there was this craze where the knuckleheads thought it was really cool to eat a Tide Pod. I just wonder what happens when those knuckleheads discover there's a bundt cake under the toilet. And the only people who get that joke are the people who have actually worked with their hands. And for far too long, the bi-coastal elitists have looked down their noses at the people who work with their hands every day. In addition to being a college professor, I also teach vocational education and have for years. And so I have a huge respect for the people who work with their hands. You know, there are only really 3 groups of people that create new wealth in our society. It's the miners, it's the farmers, and it's the builders. And the builders are dependent on the farmers and the agriculturists to grow the raw materials and the miners to dig it out of the ground. But we need to return to a respect for hard work and manual labor and revitalize the skilled trades. That's a core element by frack China policy.
Thank you. And Ms. Martinez, you have 1 minute to respond to the same question.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in some of the federal programs is that teachers are teaching for test scores, test outcomes, and they want to be able to teach based on curriculum that is going to address the specific needs of their classrooms. You know, I talk to teachers across this state who are struggling right now, especially in some of our underfunded areas and communities, where I would specifically for legislation that would allow school choice and scholarships for parents to choose where they would like to send their children, you know, based on the child's aptitude, based on the child's interest, and based on the special needs of those children. So right now we have a one-size-fit-all where one teacher is overseeing a classroom of 50 students, some that have special needs, some that may be bilingual, and some that are that have other problems that need to be addressed outside of the classroom that are not only hurting the teacher's ability to teach, but also the student's ability to learn. And so I would strongly push for programs that are going to reach a more specialized and get, you know, specialized outcomes, but also give teachers the flexibility that they need to teach based on curriculum and not test outcomes.
Thank you. And that concludes topic 2 on education. Topic 3 is the economy. The tax base of New Mexico hasn't changed much in 40 years. Tourism, revenue from extracting natural resources, particularly oil and gas, and federal facilities sustain our economy. Not only is the economy stagnant, but so is our population. We've hovered at the 2 million mark for at least 40 years. It seems we're stuck. Heather, and the first question, please.
What, when elected, would you do to help grow New Mexico's tax base and economy?
Ms. Martinez, this is for you first for 2 minutes.
So I think it's been well established that New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the country and has had the highest poverty levels in the country, highest child poverty levels. And all of this goes back to something I spoke about very early on and have experienced firsthand, and that's our dependency on government. New Mexico has the highest rate of dependency on government, be it for social welfare programs, jobs, etc. So we need to look at seriously diversifying New Mexico's economy. The extraction of minerals and our natural resources it needs to be opened up and deregulated to look at, some of the economic concerns, environmental and community concerns. We have as many natural resources as Arizona, but those are limited. Opportunities. I'm interested in looking forward, and one of the biggest challenges that we have in a negative population and output of our greatest human capital, which are our millennials and college-age students, is how to keep them here, how to provide better opportunities for families to live and grow in New Mexico and have upward mobility. And I think one of those areas that we can really leverage our current human capital and brain power that we have at our national labs is by developing partnerships with universities and our tech center and our labs in order to develop New Mexico as a tech center and compete with some of the exodus Silicon Valley and compete with our neighbors in Tempe and in Austin, which are attracting a new type of industry that is growing rapidly, and I believe is really the phase of the future. Startups and the tech industry, and be able to leverage some of the human capital that we have. That's our most valuable asset, is our people. And our people in particular who are very interested and adept in these areas, and also developing other vocational opportunities and job training programs, I think is going to be the key to New Mexico's future. We have to act sooner than later in overall diversifying the economy, attracting new business, attracting new industry, developing our current industries. In San Juan, we have lots of natural gas, but nowhere to put it. We should look at developing pipelines and other infrastructure that I can help champion in order to maximize the economy here and economic opportunities for New Mexico.
Thank you. Dr. Clarkson, you have 1 minute to respond to the same question.
Yes, when I served in the Trump administration, for every one regulation we put forward, we rolled back 22. And that is going to be through revitalizing New Mexico's economy, is continuing with that deregulation agenda. One of the things we need to do is we need to legislatively force administrative agencies to waive these burdensome federal regulations as we get our economy back on its foot. We need to make it harder to reinstate regulations that impose a net cost on the economy. We should ask the president to do an executive order to suspend all criminal and civil penalties for regulatory violations if the person made a good faith effort to comply. We should simplify the permitting process particularly for the mining, oil and gas, and ranching communities, and also for infrastructure projects. And the other thing is, I'm the only candidate with an actual plan that will bring billions of dollars of investment to New Mexico. That plan has been endorsed by Americans for Tax Reform. It's been endorsed by the current Secretary of Energy in the Trump administration. And importantly, it was endorsed by every single tribal leader in the country. And it'll bring $2 billion to New Mexico, and it won't cost the taxpayer a single dime. So we need to focus on the specifics, because we can talk about platitudes all we want, but what we need are real plans.
Thank you. Heather, question 2, which will go to Dr. Clarkson first.
If oil and gas prices remain low this year, what, as a senator, will you do to help support the industry that is the lifeblood of New Mexico?
Dr. Clarkson, 2 minutes.
Well, as you may know, I was President Trump's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Economic Development, which included supervising a multi-billion-dollar oil, gas, coal, mining, and timber portfolio, as well as an agriculture portfolio. So I feel like I'm certainly the most qualified of the Senate candidates to deal with oil and gas issues. Let's take, for example, the oil and gas problem we have right now. Because Ben Ray Lujan and the Green New Dealers were so insistent that no money be spent out of the CARES Act to support the oil and gas industry, we have excess capacity on the market, and that's why a couple of weeks ago we had the Ben Ray's Super Contango when he dances with the Green New Deal where oil prices in West Texas Intermediate futures for the May contract closed at minus $32. And yet we have $93 million of extra capacity in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So one thing I would do is I would always make sure that if we've ever tapped into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we should always be buying we should always be buying oil from New Mexico to top off the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That won't keep oil prices from crashing below zero or going up, but it will certainly help prop them up in the long term. Because the West Texas Intermediate distribution point in Cushing, Oklahoma, only has 73 million barrels of capacity, and yet the Strategic Petroleum Reserve had 93 million barrels. So we could have avoided Ben Ray's super contango. But we absolutely must continue to deregulate on federal lands. When I was in the Trump administration, our deregulation agenda was the thing that allowed the oil and gas industry to thrive in southeast New Mexico and in the Four Corners area. And unfortunately, we elected a land commissioner who wants to outlaw fracking, and we elected a congressional delegation. But we absolutely need to roll back the regulations and eliminate the statutes that allow the environmentalists to destroy our economy. And that is something that I know how to do as the next United States Senator for New Mexico.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, you have 1 minute to respond to the same question.
Well, again, our oil and gas industry provides 40% of the revenue for New Mexico. And so it's important that we restore and rebuild that industry that's been hit so hard right now. And people are hurting, in southeast New Mexico and in San Juan County. Obviously, deregulation is going to be key in order to get the industry up and running again. We need to streamline the process for leasing and for the application process. And additionally, excuse me, my allergies are just acting up. We have to work to make sure that the subsidies that renewable energy is receiving are market-based and not taking away from the development and expansion of our oil and gas industry. And so I think, President Trump is at the forefront of this battle, and I would fully support him in kickstarting the oil and gas industry, retaining our energy independence, and deregulating of the industry.
Thank you. That concludes topic 3 on economic. Topic 4 is immigration. We know that illegal immigration across the southern border creates a humanitarian hardship for migrants and legal and financial problems for the U.S. In 2016, 750,000 illegals came into our country, and that was considered normal. Then in 2019, we were suddenly on track for an annual illegal migration of twice that, or 1.5 million, before President Trump threatened tariffs on Mexico if it didn't help. Just as troubling is the number of visa overstays each year. In 2018, we had 650,000 overstays. And let's not forget that the murderers behind the 9/11 attack were here on overstayed visas. Heather, question 1, which will go to Ms. Martinez first.
What recommendations would you have to improve the immigration process here in the United States?
Ms. Martinez?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, we need to enforce existing immigration law. Number 1. Number 2, we need to make sure that we're securing the border. I fully support President Trump's plan to build the wall, to enforce existing immigration law, to provide additional funding for our ICE agents, and detention centers and judges, immigration judges. The system is simply being overwhelmed right now also by the asylum seekers. So we need to look at, truly reforming the immigration process in the United States to ensure that it is merit-based and being enforced, currently enforced. One of the other challenges that we're seeing here, specifically in New Mexico, is the crime that is spilling out into the streets of Albuquerque. Since Albuquerque became a sanctuary city in 2018, the following year, we had the highest record of homicides. And in fact, illegal immigrants, over 235,000 illegal immigrants committed a crime just in the last fiscal year, according to the White House. Of those, I believe 100,000 were assaults, 40,000 were for homicide, and then we had about 4,000 rapes. So these are the consequences of an unchecked immigration system, and the crime that is spilling out into the streets also is promoting the cartel and human trafficking activity, which I believe is exploiting some of the most vulnerable among us and the most vulnerable victims that are coming up from the southern border, including women and children. So I think it's important and imperative as a security issue as well that we enforce existing immigration law, and I support the president's plan to secure the border.
Thank you. Dr. Clarkson, you have 1 minute on the same question.
Well, I obviously have a track record of supporting strong border enforcement long before I entered the U.S. Senate race. And I actually was down on the border documenting all of the problems, because I live in Doña Ana County, which is on the southern border, and we were ground zero for that invasion of illegal aliens fraudulently claiming asylum. So we absolutely need to penalize sanctuary cities. My best friend, his younger brother was killed by an illegal alien who had been deported 4 times. My Navy career was cut short by a drunk driving illegal alien. So we absolutely need to penalize sanctuary cities. We need to close the asylum loopholes. We need to end chain migration. We need to end this fraudulent notion of birthright citizenship, because it's not true under the 14th Amendment that the children of illegal aliens are automatically U.S. citizens. It's simply not true. And yet we've been able we're suffering under that false perception. And again, I am the only candidate who has actually been part of building private wall in New Mexico in Sunland Park. So I think I have the strongest record on immigration reform, building the wall and securing our southern border. And I'm married to a legal immigrant who's a stronger border hawk than I am.
Thank you. Heather, can we please have question 2, which will go to Dr. Clarkson first.
What do you think is the best legal treatment of the Obama-labeled dreamers, anchor babies, and those who have lived in the USA for a long time?
All right. Well, so let's start with the dreamers first. And I actually have students who are dreamers, and they were brought here illegally as children. And I do not support a path to citizenship. I oppose amnesty in all of its forms. I might be willing to consider a path to residency as long as we secure the southern border first. But as I said in my earlier answer, you discussed the issue of anchor babies. I was down on the border in 2019 at Columbus, New Mexico, where every single morning when schools are open, 750 kids who live in Mexico, their parents live in Mexico, they cross the border with their U.S. birth certificates because their parents fraudulently claimed that it was too far to drive to Ciudad Juarez and they needed a humanitarian visa so that the children could be born in the Deming Hospital. They cross the border every morning at taxpayer expense. They jump on a bus, take the ride to Deming. They get a taxpayer-funded breakfast, taxpayer-funded education, taxpayer-funded lunch, taxpayer-funded return trip back to the border where they walk across. It is fraud writ large, and it is ripping off New Mexico taxpayers every single day. And so I will end birthright citizenship. The president's already looking at it, but I am not a U.S. citizen by the nature of my birth in the United States. Because I'm a tribal member, I was made a citizen by an act of Congress in 1924 called the Indian Citizenship Act. Well, if I should have been a citizen just by birth, there was no reason for Congress to act. It's one of the only things I share with AOC. Since she's Puerto Rican, her folks were made a citizen in 1917 in the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act. So it is absolutely false that anchor babies are U.S. citizens. They are not, and that needs to end. We also need to deal with the asylum fraud. As I said, I have apprehended illegal aliens at the border, or not apprehended, they surrendered to me because Border Patrol was busy with a different group of illegal aliens, and my wife was there with me. She interviewed them in Portuguese. It was total fraud.
Thank you. And Ms. Martinez, you have 1 minute to respond to the same question.
So I think as far as individuals that are here illegally, who have been here for some time, these are different areas of the issue that we need to address. I think, for those that are working, they need to become paying into the system. I would support potentially a work visa program where we can get people enlisted instead of taking from government programs, paying into them. And these problems are, I would challenge those on the far left who claim sort of a humanitarian, moral high ground in this issue when we can't even provide for our First Nations people and Indigenous people who are languishing in poverty and languishing in substandard healthcare, languishing in unemployment rates. And we simply cannot afford to continue on this path of an open illegal immigration system where people are abusing government programs and abusing taxpayer dollars. So I strongly would support, getting some of those folks a work visa program where they can come sort of out of the shadows and start participating in paying into the government. As far as
Fine.
dreamers, I think.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes topic 4 on immigration. Let's go to topic 5, which is healthcare. The Democrat-only passage of Obamacare ushered in a top-level federal program which is costly, provides poor coverage, and is underfunded. It's miserable if you've been there. Democrat candidates for all offices up and down the ticket support Medicare for all, including illegals, or as Joe Biden does, support Medicare for people over 60, possibly destroying the private healthcare network that most people enjoy today. Heather, can we have question 1, which will first go to Ms. Martinez.
What parts of the healthcare system concern you the most, and what would you do about it?
Ms. Martinez, 2 minutes.
So I think some of the biggest concerns are the lack of transparency and costs and the inability of people that actually have serious health problems going bankrupt and facing those types of challenges. And in the meantime, we have a Medicare system that is rife with waste and abuse. And I strongly oppose the 3-second soundbite solution, which is Medicare for all. As a recipient of federal subsidized medicine through the Indian Health Service, I can tell you that government-run healthcare is a disaster. The Indian Health Service is again rife with waste, abuse, inefficiency, and low quality care, long wait times, and is been under investigation for those types of abuses by private agencies. But we cannot deliver quality health care to 2.2 million Native Americans. We certainly cannot look at doing that to over 250 million American citizens who 100 million will be kicked off of their private insurance. We would lose jobs, and the price tag simply is untenable. Some of the estimates are at $47 trillion to implement a Medicare for all system, which ultimately would deliver lower quality care and longer wait times and more challenges that I think Americans could ever imagine. And I can say that as being a recipient of government healthcare through the IHS system. And I think ways to address that, again, go back to having greater transparency in costs. And I support President Trump's effort to call for greater transparency in our pharmaceutical costs. We need to look at ways that are innovative, that will deliver a higher quality care and lower wait times to individuals and increase competition through the transparency of cost. But I highly, highly oppose and would warn the American people from going down this path of a 3-second soundbite solution to a very complex and multifaceted industry in our healthcare industry. Some of the other issues would be, lowering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Dr. Clarkson, you have 1 minute to respond to the same question.
Well, as an enrolled tribal member and a second-generation Navy veteran, I actually have experience with both of the government-run healthcare systems, and they are both evidence that government shouldn't be running healthcare. Obamacare is in a death spiral because the Supreme Court properly removed the individual mandate, and the Supreme Court is probably going to invalidate the whole thing eventually. So now we need to focus on specific solutions. What is the replacement option? And once again, we can talk about platitudes, we can talk about generic stuff, but let's get down to brass tacks and figure out what needs to happen. So on my first day in the United States Senate, I would either reintroduce or sign on to what's called the Patient Option Act. It allows patients to purchase health insurance across state lines. It makes healthcare-related expenses tax deductible. It'll expand healthcare savings accounts and contributions and eligibility. It'll reform Medicare to a market-based system. It'll allow individuals to keep their health insurance if they leave their job, and it'll make healthcare pricing more transparent. and it allowed businesses and other entities to pool together to create affordable health insurance plans. And importantly, we should allow licensed healthcare professionals to practice across state lines. Those are specifics that I will stand for as the U.S. Senator.
Thank you. Heather, can we please have question 2, which will go to Dr. Clarkson first.
What would you propose to lower the cost of pharmaceutical drugs in the United States?
Dr. Clarkson, 2 minutes.
Well, again, we need to have the market competition. Right now, the FDA creates a government functional monopoly on the evaluation of drugs, but we need to be able to have market-based competition. I believe in the free market, and it will drive prices down. But the government interference in drug prices, it's also evident in something that we are all concerned about right now, and that is the coronavirus. If you remember, the FDA and the CDC insisted that they were the only entities that create coronavirus testing. They actually tried to shut down a Seattle doctor who was actually conducting tests. And the only reason we could do the test was because some Chinese scientists defied their government and leaked the genome sequencing for COVID-19 or the Chinese coronavirus out on the internet. So we had the ability to make the test, but the overzealous bureaucrats in the FDA and the CDC wouldn't let us do it. They distributed tests that were defective. They produced results in 5 to 7 days with way too many false positives. Fortunately, this president jumped in with a deregulation agenda that allowed private industry to come to our rescue. So not just in pharmaceuticals, but also in medical devices and in everything else, we need to have a greater level of deregulation to reduce the cost to bring life-saving pharmaceuticals and medical devices to market. Because, we went from an FDA and a CDC whose government-run monopoly was responsible for a defective test kit. So I think Abbott Labs has a test kit that can produce an accurate result in under 15 minutes. So we always need to look to the private sector to reduce our costs. So as Ronald Reagan said, the worst thing you can hear is, "Hi, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help." We need to get the federal government out of the way. And again, when I was President Trump's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Economic Development, I was part of the deregulation team. We need to continue this president's deregulation agenda, and that applies to pharmaceuticals and medical devices.
Thank you, Dr. Clarkson. Ms. Martinez, you have 1 minute on the same question.
So as I've stated earlier, I support the President Trump's move to helping to lower pharmaceutical drug costs by requiring transparency, requiring greater competition in the existing market. But one of the challenges that we've seen come to light through the COVID crisis is our dependency on China in the manufacturing sector of pharmaceuticals. So, we have to look at ways to bring manufacturing back to the United States. We are some of the greatest innovators in this area. And the patent, also we have to look at some of the patenting processes for these drugs and sort of take out the corruption in some of the patenting processes where you have, Dr. Fauci holds the patent for the vaccine that is supposed to mitigate coronavirus. But, I think part of that is bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And that way we can ensure quality, and we can ensure job opportunities for the future of the workforce here in America, but especially lowering the cost overall for Americans.
Thank you. Thank you. Now that concludes topic 5 on healthcare. Let's move to our last topic, which is federal spending. The first question will go to you, Ms. Martinez, for 2 minutes. Federal spending has grown rapidly over the last decade, leading to substantial budget deficits that will cripple our economy. COVID-19 has exacerbated that as lawmakers spend trillions of additional dollars and further increase the deficit in the name of helping. They're trying to help employers, laid off employees, certain sectors of the economy, such as air and travel. Heather, can we have question 1, please?
How do you propose to control spending and begin the process of reducing our national deficit?
Ms. Martinez, you have 2 minutes, please.
Well, prior to the COVID crisis, Washington, D.C. did not have a revenue problem. We had a spending problem, but now I think the federal debt is reaching, $23.5 trillion. It was doubled by the Obama administration, who spent more collectively than any administration prior. combined. So we have to look at ways immediately, not only to cut spending, but to start generating revenue, and that means getting Americans back to work. But wasteful spending needs to come to a halt. And by and large, Democrats and Republicans are responsible for the wasteful spending that takes place. I also support President Trump's policies at addressing the wasteful foreign aid that we are, pumping money into other economies and into military and other foreign aid spending projects that simply do not serve the American interest. We need to look at meaningful reform to the Medicare program, again, where there is rife abuse and wasteful spending that takes place there. But another aspect that we can do to work towards reducing the debt is reducing our trade deficit with China. And I've been very vocal about this and have looked at this issue for many years, that the trade deficit with China actually tracks our national debt ever since China was introduced into the World Trade Organization, and they use many unfair trade practices that we simply can't compete with. We cannot compete with slave labor. We cannot compete with individuals that are getting paid $1 a day living in 3x4 cells that are working 10, 12-hour days, and highly subsidized industries that ultimately drive out all of the American manufacturing, and China becomes has a monopolistic control over certain industries. So we have to look at ways, and I applaud President Trump's effort to mitigate the trade imbalances with China, which, as I said, would help contribute. Bringing those jobs and manufacturing back to the United States will also help mitigate our debt and some of these crises that we're going to be experiencing from here on out with the ever increasing national debt now due to the COVID CARES package and the current economic crisis.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Dr. Clarkson, you have 1 minute on the same question.
Well, once again, we can all probably agree on generic platitudes, but the question is what specifically can we do about the debt? And I have two very specific proposals. One is I would join on with Rand Paul's penny plan, which is absolutely a straightforward plan to reduce spending, because as Ronald Reagan said, we're not broke because we tax too little. It's because we spend too much. But the other thing is another very specific proposal, and I have been harping about this. This is something I discovered when I was in the Trump administration. We pay 1/3 of the federal workforce not to go to work every day, and this was before the coronavirus. And this mandatory telework was one of the first pieces of legislation that Ben Ray Lujan voted for. And I had a room full of economists at Interior working for me, and we did the analysis. And that fraud, waste, and abuse rips off the American taxpayer to the tune of $1 billion a day. So another piece of legislation that I will introduce on my first day as the next United States Senator from New Mexico is a repeal of mandatory telework. If we're going to have telework, it needs to be managed, supervised, and it needs to be in the best economic interest of the American taxpayer, not a payoff to the Public Sector Employees Union. So again, we need specifics, not platitudes, because that's the only way we're going to get a handle on this debt.
Thank you. And the next question will go to you first, Dr. Clarkson. Heather, can we have question 2, please?
Do you think the federal stimulus spending to support the recovery of our economy from COVID-19 is enough? Why or why not?
Well, we certainly have quite a bit of money that we put in there. My big concern is the number of entities that are getting access to that money that shouldn't. And I'll put Harvard University as number 1 as an entity that has absolutely no business getting CARES Act funding. But there's a number of small businesses that, for whatever reason, were priced out or were denied access to it. And yet, you had big fancy hotels and, people with really good lobbyists that were able to get access to it. But I'll give you an example with my wife's medical practice. My wife, she is, many of you know, she's one of the leading medical estheticians in the United States. And this is having come here as a lawful immigrant to follow the rules. But her medical practice, it's about 50 people. She does all the post-operative skin care for a group of plastic surgeons, including if a soldier, is recovering from an IED and needs facial reconstruction. And yet that's all determined to be non-essential. That's all determined to be elective. And so, so they had to shut down, but they were not eligible for the PPP loans because the doctors, in order to try and get cost economies of scale, with health insurance and back office accounting, they had allied themselves with other doctors. And that unfortunately meant that the collection was greater than 500. So even though her little office of only 50 people was shut down, they could not get access to CARES Act payroll protection loans. And again, but if you were a big multi-million-dollar restaurant franchise or a major hotel chain, you could get those same loans. So there was clearly some fundamental unfairness that was in that system, and those are things that need to be addressed. And I appreciate Secretary Mnuchin and President Trump recognizing that there were some flaws in the implementation, and so they're going to go back and audit all of the large dollar CARES Act loans and make sure that those are really the kind of entities that should be getting it. But I guarantee you, Harvard University shouldn't have gotten it. And the other thing is, it was an absolute travesty that we sent $25 million to the Kennedy Center. And then the first thing they did was just lay everybody off and make sure all the fancy senior executives and former Obama officials still got paid. So those are some problems I have with the CARES Act, but I appreciate this president's trying to fix it.
Thank you, Dr. Clarkson. Ms. Martinez, you have 1 minute on the same question.
Sure thing. So I think the CARES Act initially did deliver much needed aid, not only to businesses, but to citizens alike. Yes, there was some abuse and unnecessary spending that took place, or business entities that were taking advantage of this process. And so the DOJ has implemented some new guidelines and investigative power to look at some of the abuses. But every day that went by, I think the consequences of inaction were worse. This is an unprecedented time that our country is experiencing. And I think that the number one solution at this juncture, now that we have a better idea of what the COVID and coronavirus looks like and how to deal with it, we have to get American citizens and businesses up and running. That's the answer. I would not advocate for more and more stimulus packages, but simply we need to get American businesses open and people back to work.
Thank you. That concludes topic 6 on federal spending. And now to conclude the debate, it's time for the candidates' closing remarks. In reverse order from opening remarks, Dr. Clarkson will go first and Ms. Martinez will go second. You both have 3 minutes. Dr. Clarkson, when you're ready.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Federated Republican Women for putting on this debate. It's really a great chance in this challenging environment to get out in front of the voters with actual specific issues. And I hope debates like this allow the voters to see that there are strong differences in terms of policy competence, and also the fact that one of our opponents just isn't willing to show up and debate the issues. So I want to thank Ms. Martinez for her willingness to participate in this debate as well. But you mentioned you didn't cover the Second Amendment, so I want to take a little bit of my time to talk about the Second Amendment, because I am the only credible Second Amendment candidate, and that's evidenced by the fact that I've been endorsed by Gun Owners of America. And I would encourage everybody to go to my website, gavinclarkson.com/2A, to see my public advocacy on the defense of the Second Amendment, on the opposition to the red flag laws, and my defense of fundamental rights. But also, as the only candidate who's already proposed legislation that I would introduce on day one of those first pieces of legislation is what I refer to as my Posse Act, or the Protect Our Sheriffs from Spiteful Enforcement. It would protect our county sheriffs from the spurious lawsuits from the red flag law that was passed. It would also protect our sheriffs if they are going to get sued for trying to help reopen their local communities. And again, that's a big difference between me and the other candidates. I'm ready to introduce legislation on day one. But I mentioned my wife earlier. My wife's story is one that's really important because her family has been fleeing tyranny and socialism their entire lives. She came here legally 27 years ago. It took her 14 years in our broken immigration system to become a U.S. citizen. She's now one of the top medical estheticians in the United States, but she followed the law every single step of the way. So I'm very critical of our existing immigration system because it's not fair to the people who follow the rules. I oppose amnesty. I oppose birthright citizenship. I oppose this excessive chain migration. And I actually have specific plans to close those loopholes. And when Ben Ray Lujan calls me a racist for taking a strong stance on the border, I'm the only candidate who can credibly challenge him to a debate in Spanish, because I can say la mitad de mis compañeros en mi campaña son hijos o nietos de migrantes legales, and I can whip out my tribal ID card at the same time when I say that. I think I have a strong path to victory. When I was the Secretary of State nominee in New Mexico, even though I was a last-minute replacement, I got 25% of the tribal vote. I got heavy support up in Hispanic areas up north. Again, because I'm willing to campaign in English and Spanish, and I can even ask for your vote in Navajo. Check my track record. That's the other important thing. Everybody can say they're for this, but I'm the only one with an established track record from before I started running for the United States Senate supporting the Second Amendment. I'm the only one with an established track record in support of this president's trade policies. I'm the only candidate with a track record of supporting border enforcement before I became a U.S. Senate candidate. I'm Dr. Gavin Clarkson, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Dr. Clarkson. Ms. Martinez, you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Well, thank you again for having the opportunity to meet with you, and thank you, Gavin. I appreciate your insights and the dialogue today. But I think at the end of the day, New Mexicans are looking for a new voice and new leadership. Again, my name is Elisa Martinez, candidate for U.S. Senate, and I'm the only candidate in the U.S. Senate race who is a native New Mexican who understands the real struggles that everyday New Mexicans face day to day. I don't come from the establishment, and nor am I a former Washington bureaucrat. I'm just an everyday New Mexican that wants better for our state. And I believe that, we could be first in everything good and last in everything bad, but we have to expect more, not only of our leaders, but of ourselves. Our current leadership, Ben Ray Lujan, who has been in Congress for 10 years, in leadership for 4 years, owns the record of New Mexico being last. His own district goes without running water and electricity, which he bragged about on the House floor during the impeachment vote. And I think this is the kind of leadership that New Mexico is tired of. We're tired of rhetoric. We're tired of individuals that move here from out of state that are looking, to take advantage of maybe an opportunity versus a platform to do good. And I'm not interested in a title. I'm interested in a platform to do good by the people of New Mexico. And I believe I'm the only candidate in this race that will restore honesty and integrity to the office of government. And I challenge everyone to do their research. I have a long-standing record of advocating for New Mexico's values here in New Mexico. And as I said, my work has been covered from the New York Times, the LA Times, and everywhere in between. And people can trust that I will do what I say and say what I do. I am, again, have a record of standing for conservative values for over 10 years. I have a background in economic policy. I've also drafted legislation. I've served as a policy analyst and expert witness. Again, work with Congress, work with the White House, and I'm best suited and equipped to represent New Mexico and actually beat Ben Ray Lujan. And at the end of the day, that's what we need to put forward as Republicans, is the candidate that is best able and equipped to actually win. And I'm the only candidate in the Senate race who's actually taken on the far left in New Mexico and have won by mobilizing over 30,000 New Mexicans from all walks of life, faiths, beliefs, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And that's the kind of candidate that we need to elect. I'm a new face with accomplishments, a new voice for New Mexico, who can connect with groups that maybe have not felt represented by the Republican Party, including women, Native Americans, Hispanics, and millennials. And those are key groups that we're going to need not only to win this election, but in the future. We have to plant seeds now. And I'm interested not in just winning this election, but I'm interested in the future of New Mexico and the people who are our greatest asset. So I thank you for your support, and I thank you for your vote, and also for your time and opportunity to speak with the voters in the Santa Fe County area.
Thank you. On behalf of the Four Corners, Taos, Los Alamos, and Santa Fe Federated Republican Women, and our partners in county GOP clubs, we want to extend our thanks to both of you for running. We appreciate the time, the money, and other sacrifices involved. We also thank you for your time today to help educate the voters on your platform. And thank you to you, our New Mexico voters, who will head to the polls soon. Please, if you are healthy enough to go, please go to the available polling places in your county. Expect there to be lines and expect to wear a mask. And thank you for viewing this video and for being New Mexico's patriots.